last one of the Aristophanes Now summer event. We have had 3 lectures online and 1 live performance in Athens on this series. We actually had a good time with Aristophanes, and I hope you all, and I'm very, very happy here to welcome you to this event. And this is going to be animalistic evening today. We are having Tua Korhonen, who is a docent in Greek literature at the University of Helsinki, to talk us on the under the title "I Am a Bird: Animals, Animality, and Aristophanes." Tua is a prolific and a really great translator, and also, in addition of being a good scholar, she's leading a group of translators at the moment of the Greco-Roman drama. 2 first volumes have already come out, Sophocles and Euripides, that is. Euripides 1 of them, which seems that it promises that Euripides 2 would be coming as well. They came out in 2018 and 2020. And Aristophanes has been now recently to Tua, because Aristophanes volume is going to be published in 2023. One of Tua's research interests has been, for a long time, animals in antiquity in various roles, capacities, and meanings in the text particularly. She has produced articles on the subjects. She has written a lot on that. And there's also a monograph has been published in London together with Erika Ruonakoski on the title "Human and Animal in Ancient Greece: Empathy and Encounter in Classical Literature," that came out in 2017. There is also a case study by Tua on Aristophanes' birds. Now this leads us to birds and other animals that Tua is going to talk us about from the heart of Savolax, as it is at the moment. We will hear about humanizing animals and animalizing humans, and this sounds very promising. So take the scene now, Tua. Welcome with your animals.
Thank you, Petra, for your introduction, and hello everybody there out. First, I like to remind you of quite a recent language usage. Many who study animals in humanities and social sciences nowadays use the term non-human animals and not mere animals in order to weaken the quite sharp divide between humans and other animals, which especially our Western modern culture has underlined. However, I'm today going to use mostly the term animals for the sake of simplicity. Here on the slide is a well-known vase painting depicting a performance, a flute player in the middle, and on both sides performers dressed in animal costumes as birds with erected penises, so it's probably representing comedy scheme. Aristophanes' comedies are written for stage, but they are also dramatic poetry, that is literature. In literature, animals are basically used 2 different ways. On the one hand, animals are represented as part of the narrative, like the invasion of bedbugs in Aristophanes' Clouds. The father who is visiting Socrates' school, Frontisterion, is suffering of bedbugs' bites. And animals might even be mute characters, like the donkey in the beginning of The Wasp. Under this donkey's belly, Philocleon, the jury-frenzied protagonist, managed to slip away from his house. Usually, animals are in the background. The other way to use animals in literature is, of course, in figures of speech, in metaphors, similes, symbols, and allegories, reflecting human characteristics and human life. Philocleon in The Wasp is compared, among other things, with Mouse in his useless attempts to escape from his house. Although animals occur in Greek tragedies, they are seldom as part of the narrative. Tragic poets use animal metaphors. For example, Tecmessa is compared with a lion protecting her cub in Sophocles' Ajax. Instead, Aristophanes' comedies are rich of animals, both symbolic and animals as part of the narrative. The one reason for this is the corporeality of comedies. The basic needs and desires of the body, hunger, lust, and need to defecate are openly declared in the old Attic comedy. Besides, Aristophanes creates fantastic animals, like the giant dung beetle by which the main character flies to heaven in the piece parodying Euripides' Bellerophon. In the opening scene of the piece, two slaves cleaning the stable of the dung beetle speculate that some of the audience may wonder, what does the beetle mean? And some then would answer that it refers to Cleon, is a symbol for Cleon, the general, at whose expense Aristophanes most often jokes and insults, as Petra elaborated last week. In the passage of the piece, Aristophanes thus plays with the common use of animals as symbols. What does the beetle mean? Although this particular insect has a role as a mocking kind of Pegasus in this comedy. Besides, Aristophanes' characters tell many animal fables, often fake, not real Aesopic fables, and they report fantastical dreams and fake oracles containing animals, like the dream told in the beginning of the wasp of sheep wearing human clothes, attend a meeting on the Pnyx at Athens, and then a sea monster arrives squealing like a pig. This dream is then interpreted by the characters, especially what does these animals mean. Furthermore, Aristophanes' extant comedies contain 4 animal named ones with animal named choruses. I will start with them and discussing also how animals were mimicked outside comedies on the one hand, and animal performers, live animals at stage on the other. Then I have a more or less theoretical part, starting with metamorphosis and the concept of anthropo and zoomorphism, with an example from the Acarnians, and continuing by arguing with examples taken from the knights and the wasps, that Aristophanes often mix humanizing animals and animalizing humans, resulting even sort of metamorphosis. After that, I will concentrate on the birds and argue that in this comedy, Aristophanes gives, among other things, also birds' points of view. Of course, it is an imagined and humanized one, but it still reveals an empathetic position, by which I mean that it makes us imagine what it is to be like a bird, according to Aristophanes. I will conclude my presentation with few words of so-called post-humanistic sensitivity to animal issues and the question why animals, especially humanized animals, have been and still are one of the basic laughingstock of comical art. And now on animal choruses. Kenneth Rothwell has argued in his Nature Culture and the Origins of Greek Comedy, a study on animal choruses, that animal choruses have their origin in fertility rituals, coming of age transitions, and so on. Rothwell claims that the first peak of using animal choruses in comedies was in the turn of the 6th and 5th century BC. The most famous comic poet was Magnes, who wrote comedies named Frogs, Birds, and Fig Wasps. Aristophanes refers to Magnes' animal comedies in his Knights. There were 2 comic poets named Crates, and some fragments of the earlier Crates, wild animals, have survived. And we know that the second Crates wrote a comedy named Birds. Then there was a gap when animal choruses went out of fashion to be popular again, according to Rothwell. And this revival produced such works as Nightingales and Tereus attributed to Cantarus. Tereus, as you may remember, was a mythological Thracian king who committed a serious crime. He raped his wife's sister and was punished by gods who transformed Tereus into a bird, a hoopoe, härkälintu in Finnish. Tereus as a bird is a character in Aristophanes' Birds too. And finally, there were Archippus fishes and Eupolis goats. Besides names, some fragments have survived, according to which one topic of these animal name comedies was eating animals. animal chorus of Magnes wild animals, it is in Greek Theria, ask why they are eaten by humans. Of Aristophanes' 11 extant comedies, the first animal chorus is in the Knights or Riders, a chorus of riders, not horses. Here on the slide is the well-known picture of a vase painting representing chorus of riders. Two actors were needed to make a rider and an actor dressed as horse. Was this an actual situation at stage? We do not know. Then we have the wasp containing first the chorus of jurors revealing more wasp-like costumes shortly afterwards. Nearly 10 years later, the birds was produced having a chorus of birds representing different bird species. And finally, the frogs with two choruses, chorus of frogs at the beginning and later a chorus of Dionysian mystics. Aristophanes wrote also a comedy named Storks, which is lost. As you may notice, birds seems to be favorite animals to be depicted as chorus at stage. Besides, satyr choruses in satyr plays can be viewed as animalized choruses. In Sophocles' Ichneutae trackers, of which considerable part have been preserved by papyri, satyrs act like dogs searching for Apollo's cattle. Animals were obviously mimic also outside comedy scheme. Mimicking animal behavior and outward form by dressing as animals or wearing, for instance, horns was common in many primordial rituals like hunting rituals. This can be called zoomorphism or theriomorphism, humans mimicking animals and taking animal features. There are some evidence of archaic Greek ritual dances in which humans were dressed as animals or have some animal features like the so-called Scops Owl dance. There were seasonal customs when children play animals like swallows, indicating the coming of spring. And at stages, simulating animal sounds was a favorite pastime. Most famous, attested in several sources, was a performer named Parmenon, who became famous for his ability to mimic squeals of pig. Plato complained in his Republic that actors are imitating sounds of horses, bulls, dogs, sheep, and birds. And in his Laws, Plato condemns instrumental music which imitate animal voices. Animals were surely mimicked in daily life too, for example, in insults, as in the case of a certain Conon whom Demosthenes is told to have abused another man by mimicking cock, by crowing like a cock and by flip-flopping his elbows against his side like a cock flopping his wings. Actual real-life animals were put at stage to perform usually very humanizing acts, that is, they mimic human behavior and gestures and were often dressed partly in human clothes. Isocrates mentioned a yearly show arranged at Athens where lions and bears were dancing and wrestling. Plutarch tells of a dog actor, an actual dog mimicking dying at stage, and the audience was greatly removed by these Plutarch reports. Where live animals used in comedy performances is a disputed issue. For instance, animals were usually not allowed to enter sanctuaries, and theaters were dedicated to Dionysus. In some, animals were put to mimic human acts and behavior, even dress up with human clothes. They were humanized, and humans were playing with zoomorphic features mimicking animal behavior and outlook. Furthermore, to change one's form, a change from one species to another, was an essential part of Greek mythological thinking. Buxton, in his Forms of Astonishment, Greek Myths of Metamorphosis, published in 2009, presents the interesting question: did the Greeks actually believe in metamorphosis, and how they believe? We may also ask, was it so that the Greeks, when they saw, for instance, a hoopoe, recalled that the bird was once a king, Tereus? This actually happens to Socrates and Chaeremon, the characters in the dialogue Halcyon or on Metamorphosis, attributed to Lucian, but definitely not by him. Socrates and Chaerephon saw a bird, halcyon, that is kingfisher, and Chaerephon then asked, not mockingly but seriously, how one is to believe of the stories women turning to birds. In his late dialogue, Timaeus, Plato has a very strange myth, not of metamorphosis but metempsychosis, reincarnation, in which at the beginning they were only men, but after some of them conducted not a perfect life, they became women or birds or different kind of animals in their next life. Thus, there need to be some continuity between the old and new form concerning either mind or body or superficial outer features. King Tereus is transformed to a hoopoe because hoopoes have crests on their heads which remind of crowns. Changing into birds was quite common, a sort of metamorphic myth. Ornithogonia, a lost work by a writer named Poios from the 3rd century BC, contained 2 books of stories of human transformed into birds. One feature of myths of metamorphosis was that they depicted a change from human to non-human form, and very seldom other way round. One example of the latter is Achilles' men, the myrmidons, who have formerly been insects' aunts. In the most famous and most extensive work on metamorphosis in ancient literature, Ovid describes the process of metamorphosis, but not what happens to the metamorph, for example, to Tereus after he has become a bird. Instead, in the birds, Aristophanes' Tereus bird is living among birds with his wife Procne and has learned birds' languages. There are some other literary works concentrating on the life after metamorphosis. Besides Apuleius' The Golden Ass, there is, for example, Plutarch's Gryllus, a virtuous pig, was a former member of Odysseus' crew. Plutarch's pig and Apuleius' donkey are, of course, humanized due to the fact that they are animals with human mind. After receiving an animal body, they still keep their human cognitive abilities. Plutarch's Gryllus is even able to speak. Babette Putz has noticed in her articles Straight from the Horse's Mouth, Speaking Animals in Aristophanes' Comedy, that Aristophanes seems, I quote, to blur the boundary between animal metaphor and metamorphosis, which is strikingly expressed through animal characters speaking a mixture of Greek and animal sounds, end of quote. That is also on the line. That is, in comedies, many humanized animals utter animal sounds like the frog chorus in the frogs croaking, perekekeks, quacks, quacks, but speaking Greek too. This idea from metaphor to metamorphosis is, in my opinion, going even further in Aristophanes' comedies than mere mixing human language and animal voices. In the Wasps, Philocleon is said to become gignetai, a sparrow, because he acts like a sparrow. The verb gignetai is common in descriptions of metamorphosis. In order to elaborate the connection between metaphor and metamorphosis, here on this slide is a picture by German artist Christoph Meyer, in connection of which one may ask, is this figure a lion dressed as a human? Then it is a case of anthropomorphism, humanizing animals, or a human depicted as a lion. Then it is animalizing humans. In the second edition of his book, Ecocriticism, Greg Garand, focusing on modern literature, sees anthropomorphism and zoomorphism basically as metonymical relations. Metonymy is a likeness relation. Philocleon is like a mouse, which is equating 2 different but somehow similar things, whereas metaphor, for instance, Philocleon is a sparrow, is equating 2 different beings, a man and a bird, which of course have something in common so that these things can be equated. Still, metaphorical relation underlines the otherness. We may ask, was the ancient Greek relationship with other animals more like between 2 of same kinds, a likeness, than between 2 of different kinds, that is, otherness? a metaphorical relation. Karen underlines that the otherness is not only negative, of course. When the other is thought to be somehow divine, it is numinous otherness, as Karen calls it. An example of animals as at least positive other is in Aristophanes' Women at Thesmophoria. A midwife is giving a newborn baby to the master of the house, saying, "You have got a lion, master, a lion, the very image of yourself." But in insults, animals are obviously seen as negative other. In antiquity, slaves and barbarians were often treated, as Antti mentioned in his presentation, as commodities and animalized. In accordance with the term tetrapoda, four-footed animals, a pejorative term, andrapoda, man-footed beings, was used of slaves, especially those acquired in war. Thinking of Greek literary genres, it is noteworthy that Homeric epics abound with similes, which are called epic similes because they are so long. Achilles is compared with a lion, and the epic writer often gives a full description of the situation of that lion. Instead, the Attic drama, tragedy, and comedy prefers metaphors. However, as said in Aristophanes, these metaphors seems to sway into metamorphosis. Philocleon is a sparrow metaphor because he became Gignetai, a sparrow metamorphosis. Furthermore, Aristophanes often mix humanizing animals and animalizing humans, using both these devices at the same time. One example of this is in the Acarnians. The passage which Vesa mentioned in his presentation too. In this passage, Aristophanes is making comedy of the very tragic results of the war, that is, parents selling their children. The famished Megarian father is going to sell his daughters as slaves. He first asks her daughters whether they want to be sold or to starve, and the girls answer, "Peprastai, peprastai," sold, sold. They thus prefer being sold than dying of hunger. This is the only human language expression which the girls utter. The father is doubtful that anybody will buy his daughters, and therefore he disguised them as pigs, giving them fake piggy hooves and snouts, and put them in a sack, ordering them to grunt like pigs. Koi, 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 so that they would be sold as piglets to be sacrificed to Aphrodite. Carol Adams, in her Sexual Politics of Meat, published in 1990, paralleled objectification of animals and objectification of women. This passage of the Acarnians is doing the same. These zoomorphized girls are fake pigs sacrificed to Aphrodite and then metaphorically consummated as pork, but factually female meat sold as sex slaves. Aristophanes' trick is to mix animalizing humans with humanizing animals, which is most evident in the line by Dicaiopoulos, the protagonist of the Acarnians, a farmer who at first suspects whether these piglets are pigs at all, stating that the one he sees or touches is a human pig, a pig of humankind, koiros anthropou nomo. Girls are disguised as pigs, animalized, and then Dicaiopoulos humanized the animal, seeing pig as human kind of pig. Like the lion in Christoph Meyer's picture can be seen as a lion of humankind and a human of lion kind. Also in the frogs, the passage when Dionysus meets the frog chorus contains humanized frogs praising their own croaking, saying that even Apollo and Muses love their croak. And animalize Dionysus, who engaged in a contest of croaking. Thus, Dionysus, a god famous for his metamorphosis, became as if a frog croaking prekekekex coax coax. Human-animal hybrids can also be seen as part of this mixing of animalizing humans and humanizing animals. However, we are more prone to think centaur, man's head and torso, combined with horse's body as a man in horse's body, especially the wise centaur Chiron, the teacher of Achilles and Jason. Whereas Minotaur, with his animal head, and human body is more like a bull in man's body. So centaurs are more like animal as humans, and Minotaur a human as animal. In Xenophon's Kyropedia, Education of Kyros, one of the Prince Kyros' companions, Chrysantas ponders the interesting question what it is like to be a centaur, considering how uncomfortable it would be for a centaur, for instance, to sleep. And all in all, how difficult it would be, I quote, to be tied to a horse, body and soul. The topic of Chrysantas' discussion was riding, and centaur works practically as a metaphor for riding, and the bond between horses and riders. A rider is tied to a horse, body and soul. In the Knights, Aristophanes humanized horses and animalized riders in the quite surprising passage in which the chorus leader is recalling the Battle of Corinth. Hippos means horse, and the name of the comedy Hippes or Hippes means riders, horsemen, or cavalry, referring especially to the elite cavalry of Athenian army. The chorus leader of riders is praising their horses for their deeds in the Battle of Corinth, adding that horses even rode boats, the big war galleys with long oars, as well as ate non-edible food for horses like onions. Humanized horses have also some equine features. Young horses were ordered to dig sleeping places in the Corinthian sand by their hooves. The horses dig with their hooves to bore the grounds. And there is a sort of horse neighing, hippapapai, which Aristophanes has created according to the coxing command of Athenian oarsmen, ruppapapai. Hippapapai occurs in horses' speech. Horses are coaxing each other to row, addressing especially Samphoras, which is a brand name, not name of an individual horse. The horse of the Athenian cavalry were usually branded by a hot iron rod, and Samphoras horses from Sicyon were marked with a sigma. However, after Samphoras, the speech moves quite unexpectedly from horse to a rider named Theoros, and the passage ends with a reference to horsemen, Hippes. Furthermore, in the end, a crab, Karkinos, is complaining that they will be all eaten by horsemen. Crab in Greek is Karkinos, but Aristotle mentioned in his Historia Animalium a crab species nicknamed Hippeus, horseman. Is this then a kind of code language of the cavalry or code language of a Tiasos, when even crabs may represent horsemen? As Petra told us last week, chorus of the Knights may possibly refer to a Tiasos of Heracles. The passage could, of course, be interpreted simply as telling that elite cavalrymen were forced to row boats, sleep on beach, and eat crabs during the Battle of Corinth. But still, horsemen are animalized to be horses, they are transformed as if into horses, and horses are humanized to be rowing horsemen. In the Wasp, the chorus can be seen as both hybrids and metamorphs. As I mentioned before, the chorus of Wasp is first in Dürer costumes, then they shed their cloaks and reveal more wasp-like costumes with sharp stingers as weapons. They do not push like wasps, but they are said to respond to smoke like wasps. The Wasp contains several humanizing and animalizing passages like animalization of Philocleon. The dog trial scheme in the Wasp seems at first to be an example of quite simple humanizing animals. The private fake court is arranged at Philocleon's home. A sheepdog Labes is accused of having stolen a piece of Sicilian cheese. Labes refers to a politician named Laches who was accused of having stolen money from Athens' Sicilian alleys. The second dog, a nameless watchdog, from Demos good Athenaion, is the primal accuser and refers to Cleon. Cleon has past been a watchdog of Athens, and Cleon's name sounds like the Greek for dog, Kyon. Even Cleon's loud voice was compared to barking. In the Wasp, Cleon dog barks ow ow to Philocleon's question, where is the accuser, the dog of good Athenaion. Besides barking, the three short species are attributed to Cleondok, whereas the Labesdok, the cheese thief, is completely silent. At stage, actor playing Cleondok was more or less dressed in dog costumes, whereas Labes Lakes could have been only a prop. Or both were props and Cleondok species came behind the Skene building. There are many possibilities. An effective mixing of humanizing animals and animalizing humans in Cleondok's line is Cleondok's line that Labes of all the dogs is the greediest man, Aner, that is on the slide. The line can be interpreted simply to claim that Labes, that is Lakes, is the greediest man. This claim is combined with the idea that both Cleon and Lakes are like dogs, are doggies having some negative canine characteristic. However, Lakes is metaphorically Labes dog, Lakes is animalized at states as dog, and at the same time this fictional Labes dog is humanized as the greediest man, Aner. The corporeality of these two dogs, nameless Kyon and Labes, is in display not only at state with their possible dog costumes, but their animal characters and domesticated animals' life is in many ways referred to in the text. Aristophanes' device is to transfer from metonymy, Lakes and Cleon are like dogs, to metaphor, Lakes and Cleon are dogs, and finally to metamorphosis at stage with doggish costumes or as dog props. They are metamorphs men who have become dogs, having dog's life. So now to the birds, to the cloud cuckoo land, to the society of birds and humans metamorphose into birds. As I mentioned, there were two earlier comedies named Birds as well as Cantharus Nightingales and Tereus before Aristophanes lost Storks and the Birds. Bird characters seem to be useful at stage, and one reason surely is that they, like humans, have 2 feet. Bipedality creates a kind of affinity between birds and humans. The definition man is a featherless biped is a modification from the passage in Plato's Statesman, and Aristotle mentions that birds have 2 legs like man, in this respect resembling him more than any other animal does, end quote. Ancient Greeks were used to inspect behavior of birds or some birds in divinatory practices. The Greek word ornis meant bird, but also omen. Many birds make their nests in our buildings, living thus near to us. In all, birds are more conspicuous than many other animals, not to forget birds' privileged ability to fly. In the beginning of the birds, 2 Athenian, Peisidyros and Euelpides, are looking for a better place to live because they are tired of sycophants, foreigners, base-born social climbers, and clever flatterers. Peisidyros and Euelpides want first to visit Tereus, because as a bird, Tereus has seen many countries and might be able to advise the best place to live. But as it happens, Tereus describes the bird life to be so wonderful, comparing it to the life of newlywed, that Peisidyros and Euelpides decide to stay with birds. They are human settlers in the realm of birds. Peisidyros and Euelpides are, however, at first not sure whether the creature they are meeting is Tereus at all. So Euelpides asks, "Are you Tereus? What bird you are? A peacock?" Tereus confirms his bird identity. "I am truly a bird, ornis egoge." Tereus speaks both bird and human languages. He tells that he has taught birds to speak Greek and to keep servants or slaves. Tereus' servant was a man metamorphosed into a plover Trochilus. This transformation happened because Tereus needed a servant who is able to move quickly from one place to another. So flying is associated with fast moving, fitting for a servant. In Greek, pteroes, winged feathered, pointed to quickness, which is shown in sayings like winged words or winged arrows. But winged referred also to flighty, that is light-minded, fickle, simple-minded. In Plato's Timaeus, in the passage I mentioned before, men who were light-minded and superficial, who trust only their senses, were in their next life transformed into birds. So light-mindedness was associated with birds. Tereus summons birds to meet the new settlers. Calling birds includes a lot of playing with birds' voices like trioto, trioto, toto, prix, and different habitats and habitus of birds are described. Although birds are first hostile to the incomers, a battle is almost near. Peisidarus soon convinced the birds that the Athenians have come with good intents. In order to win birds in his side, Peisidarus created a flattering bird history. Birds are, in fact, older than the Olympian gods. They were former kings of all living beings. After that, Peisidarus encouraged birds to challenge the gods by building a wall in heaven, which will prevent the sacrificial smoke reach the dwelling place of the god, who are living even above birds, above clouds. The description of this wall building, which a messenger bird reports to Peisidarus, is of course funny. For instance, pelicans use their web feet in order to mold clay. The wall is constructed and then some gods arrive at the cloud Kukulan conveying that Zeus is very angry and birds should destroy the wall. The gods, however, could not persuade Peisidarus, so in the end, Peisidarus became the supreme ruler, tyrannos of men, of gods, of birds. Peisidarus and Euripides are settlers who at first are willing to adjust to live like birds. After their arrival, the society of birds changed to be more human-like. Although already Tereus taught birds to speak Greek and introduced a kind of slavery, Peisidarus changed the original society of the birds even more, changing the birds to live like humans, making heaven. The Greek word in this context is polos, to polis, a kind of city-state which attracts a lot of curious people, especially fortune hunters and also a sycophant, some of them willing to be immigrant in this new polis. But also the settlers, Peisidarus and Euripides, changed. When they entered into the community of birds, they didn't mean to become birds as such, but simply human members in bird society. After discussing with Tereus, Peisidarus recognized that one does not, in fact, diminish when one becomes a bird. Instead, one becomes more powerful, having the resources of both human and birds. To Tereus, Peisidarus says, "You know, Phrones, all what humans know and birds know." Peisidarus is also anxious how he and Euripides, because they cannot fly, could manage to live with birds. Tereus promised them wings and later gives them a magic herb, root of a plant, which makes wings sprout from their backs or from their sides. The two Athenians preserve their human mind in this process, and their outer form seems to change only partly. Although Peisidarus orders Euripides to guard over the building of the wall, giving impression that Euripides would fly to the wall building site, he himself does not seem to use his feathers for flying. Peisidarus, however, identifies himself as a bird in the end when he is insisting that the birds had to become the rulers again. Zeus had to give power back to us birds. In all, a new settlement caused reciprocal change. Humans are animalized or avianized and birds humanized. Still, the bird chorus stay in bird role, body and soul, in all its speeches, addressing in times the audience as birds. So the bird's point of view, presented mainly by the chorus of birds, imagined by Aristophanes, is for our disposal. This great comedy writer has given us birds a voice, and not only trioto, trioto, toto, prix. The first aspect of this bird's point of view is birds' attitude to humans. When the bird chorus as bird army first confront the immigrants, Peisidarus and Euripides, birds express their fear of humans and that they also hate humans. Secondly, birds describe their blissful, simple living apart from humans. This bucolic passage occurs in the second parabasis. You have it on the slide. It is Jeffrey Henderson's translation, little modified, happy the race of feathery birds and so on. And as you notice, Aristophanes can be lyrical in times, but it's typical for him that he quickly moves from lyrical or even serious to something mundane and trivial. The bird cosmogony is a mock imitation of current theogonies, their lofty modes of expressions, and a token of the cultural relativism of the 5th century. Because the cosmogony is composed by birds, it of course contains winged gods and a cosmic egg. The most important part of bird's point of view presented by Aristophanes are descriptions of cruelty to birds, fouling, trapping, and selling practices. Birds even propose new laws which will punish the ill-treating of birds, which would then be forbidden in the new city-state of birds. Also, the birds thought. These passages are, again, little modified translation by Jeffrey Henderson. We cannot, of course, say that these descriptions reveal anything of Aristophanes' sympathy to birds, or can we? Is Aristophanes turning a disturbing thing like bird lying falling funny with a comical twist? In any case, as a poet, he had the ability to think fouling practices also from the bird's point of view. For instance, bird lime fouling. It is successful for hunters, but causes great suffering to birds. It is noteworthy that the first passage is said by Peisistratos, and it is surely part of his strategy to gain power in the realm of birds, which is the main plot line of this comedy. Peisistratos doesn't create a democracy. As a supreme ruler, Tyrannos, he executes, as he says, some birds, claiming them to have been a threat to his fake democracy. You have the line on the slide. In fact, he's preparing a bird meal, which will be served in his wedding feast, which ends the comedy. Birds once called him a savior, Soter, and now he is killing and eating them. If this macabre bird meal reminds us of the end of George Orwell's Animal Farm, what was the reaction of the Athenian audience? At least Aristophanes doesn't seem to depict Peisistratos as a sympathetic comic character with agreeable flaws. Peisistratos fled from Athens because he was tired of its sycophants and flatterers. Then, by flattering birds, he creates a society which attracts especially sycophants. At least modern audience may both laugh and feel sympathy to these noble savage birds in Aristophanes' Birds. Now, completing my presentation, I make one more question. Why do we laugh at animals? Social media is full of pictures of companion animals like cats and dogs dressed in human clothes and put to act or posture human-like. According to phenomenological philosophy, we are our bodies, especially in the sense that we inspect other species according to our human body. So animals, especially humanized animals like dogs dressed as humans driving bicycles in circus, fail to reach our embodied norm. They are disabled to drive bicycles, and that's why we laugh at them. Is it then politically as incorrect to laugh at a dog driving a bicycle as laughing at disabled or mentally retarded people? Is laughing distorting the dignity of these subdued groups, animals included? These questions express post-humanistic sensitivity to animal issues. To put it simply, post-humanism is a redefinition of humanity's place in the world, especially our relationship with our environment, relationship with non-human animals. However, there are different shades of humanizing animals. Here on the slide, there are two pictures of a raccoon doing human-like acts. We can be sure that playing with this toy piano doesn't give much pleasure or joy for this raccoon, although raccoons have a very dexterous front paws. Playing basketball is more suitable activity for a raccoon. Trying to drop the ball in the basket can be viewed as an agility practice for an animal living in an unnatural environment. Aristophanes' comedies contain comically humanized or half-humanized non-human animals which reflect and parody human nature and human society, as well as animalized humans, but in my view, also very interesting mixing of anthropomorphism and zoomorphism, like by quoting philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty's phrase, two mirrors facing each other. An actor playing a dog transformed into a dog at stage is both an animalized human and a humanized animal, and not only a reference to some well-known human. Aristophanes and his audience attitude to animals obviously differed from post-humanistic sensitivity to animal issues. In any case, I recommend you to pay attention, among many other interesting aspects in Aristophanes' comedies, also to their rich animality. So thank you for listening, and the bibliography is on the last slide. Yes.
Thank you, Tua. So, it was lovely to hear about Aristophanes' animals, and when we hear about animals, we then to hear about humans as well. So thank you particularly to all of you who have presented on our series, and thank you for coming to join us. So I hope that we would one day to come back to Aristophanes in one form or another.